not just the discussions, it's about planning. The last film I did, we did a feature length at 96, Doc. We did 2 1 hours, because they wanted, BBC Scotland wanted it to go out 1 week and then the next week. The History Channel in Canada, which was a partner, wanted to go out 2 1 hours back to back, but with commercials in it. Get used to dicing and slicing, frankly. And not only, when I say get used to it, budget it. That's the most important thing. I mean, besides the fact you're going to drive your director out of his mind when he has to do new, deciding when the advertising break is not why people go into directing films, but it's a necessity.
Just got one question from the floor.
Mine's not really a question, but just in that, further to the idea of planning and budgeting, I think something that we haven't talked about is the legals. And the legals in a co-production are just, when I made some co-productions years ago and co-finance projects as well, tens of thousands of dollars if you do it properly. And that's why it's so important, the contracts you've done, the treaty or contract or whatever you've done with the Brazilian TV producers. You can't underestimate how important those test programs are, because they save the independent producer a lot of money in the legals, and you do have to be aware that once you start going out into the market, pitching to so many people, you're already opening up the more and more contracts, and you've got to be prepared for the money of that as well.
Complementando o que ela está dizendo, quando a gente fala até de produção no Brasil, um ponto importante é a questão de compra de imagem de arquivo, a disponibilidade, a qualidade e para quantos países a gente está comprando. Então, se vai fazer um documentário que você realmente queira uma janela para todos os países do mundo, o preço disso pode ser bastante caro. Então, é muito importante lembrar disso logo no começo para já ter essa negociação e poder distribuir depois.
Hi, my name is Eduardo. I'm representing Brasileira Filmes here with the project Black Box. Although I have like a million questions, I'm going to choose number 34. And it's about the way you handle the budget and how you divide it among like international co-producers. There's a certain amount of money you have to spend in your own country among 2 co-producers. How you guys work this out, especially when you have like the creative on one side and you have to spend parts of the other? You put it on post-production, or how you kind of see this whole process?
Each country has different rules and different treaties for official co-production. As I said, Canada has a very protective system. It has agreements with 50 countries, but these agreements are not necessarily the same. But we have a minimum. It's 20%. The minority partner must be at a minimum of 20%. That's the first thing. Secondly, for fiction has a point system, and documentary also have a point system. So the creative positions must be in proportion to the proportion that you're in. For example, there's 5 creative positions in documentary. If you're 20%, you need 1 Canadian, if it's the minority partner. And also, 75% of Canadian money must be given to Canadians or spent in Canada. So there's very creative producers that get around that, because I agree with Bill, you have to be creative, but at one point, you cannot lie about this. Everything is checked, double checked, triple checked on co-production in Canada. Also, very important, the same documents must be both places. One budget, same budget. There were systems where there were 2 different budgets or 3 different budgets, and most of the time, this just created a huge mess.
There are some areas of flexibility.
Can you name some?
Yes, I will. The most important one that I've often used is distribution money, or American money, because Canada's essentially the whole purpose of Canadian co-production treaties is to get them to work with everybody else but the Americans. And if you were in Canada, you'd understand. So, I mean, that's, so, but if you get a Canadian pre-buyer and you're doing a UK-Canada co-production, you could make that money go to Britain or you can make it go to Canada, depending on where you want to spend the money and who's your, where your things are. The other thing is if you're traveling a Canadian crew to Siberia, it's still a Canadian cost. And when they eat in Siberia, because it's Canadian stomachs, it's a Canadian cost. So, these are the kinds it sounds, and post-production is always a big one. And where are you going to put it? And it means that you can often make the film you want with lots of whatever country you're trying to please at one time, but get your director is not a huge cost compared to the overall budget, but sound mixing, editing, all that stuff, different versions. So you have those kind of flexibilities depending on where you're getting your hunk of money and where you're spending it.
Can I just say that the BBC doesn't care where the money's spent, it makes us a lot easier to work with pretty much anyone else. But also I was going to echo, there are two ways around it. You can do it if you do co-production deals with local production companies, which we haven't talked about. Then obviously some of the money can go to them and they can raise, they're good at often raising money from foundations in their own country. So, for instance, if you work with an Australian co-producer in the west coast of Australia, if they come in, you can pretty much be guaranteed that you'll get an extra $200,000 in your budget from Screen West Australia, who are now going to hate me, obviously, because I've given that away. But the other trick, as Bill said, is to move the edit. We work a lot with the Irish Film Board, who, as long as 40% of the budget, I think, is spent in Ireland, they're happy. So I spend my life flying to Dublin to do rough cuts, because if you put in the offline and online editing, then it's easily over 40%, and then you can do what you want.
Question from the floor here.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, yes. My name is Enrique. I come with Caribe Produções and a project called Mission Environment. And the question is that looking at the projects that we have here, the 40 projects, a lot of them are about very peculiar stories, like culture stories about Brazil, very contextualized to the Brazilian reality. How can we make this and turn into something that's attractive and appealing to a global audience? Easy one.
They're very rich people. I think what I find when I'm commissioning is the ideas that turn me off are the ones that are going to take an awful lot of explanation at the beginning, and those are the ones that feel too local. Because if my audience doesn't know a lot about certain bits about Brazilian life, you're going to have to explain it to them, which means the film will be very boring for the first 15 minutes. It'll be like a lecture. So the films that tend to work, that tend to be international, are sort of, I think, in my strand, the sort of the human condition films, the films where you're led by a character, and you get into that character instantly, and then off their story you can hang all the stuff that people need to find out. So it's looking for the universal things that apply all around the world and to all sorts of people that transcend the big, massive cultural differences there are between all of the co-producers. That's my try.
I mean, there were quite a few projects that we got that I just thought, this is for Brazilians. I mean, there's some things that you're just not going to travel. And frankly, especially, should I try to say this nicely? No, I won't. Okay. Projects that have